In the early 19th century, Britain was captivated by the Arctic. This fascination wasn't just about adventure, it was shaped by empire, commerce, and science. At the heart of this obsession was the Northwest Passage, a sea route linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. To Britain, it promised faster trade with Asia and a strategic advantage for its navy. After the Napoleonic Wars ended in 1815, the Royal Navy found itself with surplus ships, officers, and funds. Arctic exploration offered a way to put these resources to work while projecting British influence. The Admiralty presented polar voyages as missions of national pride, scientific discovery, and imperial necessity. The Franklin expedition of 1845 embodied this mindset. Sir John Franklin was tasked with charting the last unmapped stretch of the Northwest Passage. His ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, were heavily provisioned and equipped with the latest technology. Yet, despite this industrial might, the expedition underestimated the Arctic itself. Indigenous knowledge, refined over generations, was largely ignored. When Franklin and his crew disappeared, Britain launched more than 30 search missions between 1848 and 1859, one of the largest rescue efforts in exploration history. These searches weren't just humanitarian. They extended Britain's presence in the Arctic, producing detailed maps, naming new territories, and asserting soft claims. Ironically, much of what we know about the Arctic coastline came as a result of failure. The Franklin disaster exposed the limits of British assumptions, overconfidence in hierarchy, technology, and European methods. Britain never achieved lasting Arctic control. Yet, the obsession surrounding Franklin reveals how exploration was more than discovery. It was a mirror of empire, ambition, and national identity. Sir John Franklin was born in 1786 in Lincolnshire, England. He joined the Royal Navy at just 14, beginning a life defined by service, exploration, and endurance. Franklin saw action in major naval battles, including Trafalgar, and quickly gained a reputation as a disciplined and determined officer. But it was the Arctic that would define his legacy. Between 1819 and 1827, Franklin led 2 overland expeditions to chart the northern coast of Canada in the search for the Northwest Passage. These journeys were grueling. Men suffered starvation, frostbite, and exhaustion, and many perished along the way. Franklin's determination earned him the nickname, "the man who ate his boots." Yet he returned with valuable knowledge of the Arctic and a reputation as a skilled, if stubborn, explorer. After his Arctic ventures, Franklin served as Lieutenant Governor of Van Diemen's Land, now Tasmania, from 1837 to 1843. His tenure was marked by controversy. Critics accused him of inflexibility and disputes with local officials, but he also brought order and structure to the colony. In 1843, he returned to Britain, and soon after, at the age of 59, he was appointed commander of the expedition that would attempt the final stretch of the Northwest Passage. In 1845, Franklin embarked aboard HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, confident in the ships, his crew, and their preparations. But the Arctic proved unforgiving. The ships became trapped in ice near King William Island, and Franklin died in 1847. His fate, along with that of his 129 men, remained a mystery for years, becoming one of the most haunting tragedies of polar exploration. Despite this, Franklin's legacy is complex. He was a man of courage, discipline, and unwavering determination. His expeditions expanded knowledge of the Arctic and embodied the ambitions and limitations of 19th century exploration. Through triumph and tragedy, Sir John Franklin became a symbol of both the allure and the dangers of the polar world. Segment 3. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror were no ordinary ships. Originally built as bomb vessels for the Royal Navy, their sturdy hulls and reinforced structures made them surprisingly well suited for the harsh Arctic environment. Both had already proven themselves in Antarctic exploration under James Clark Ross between 1839 and 1843, navigating treacherous southern seas. For the Franklin expedition, the ships were extensively modified. Iron plating strengthened the wooden hulls, steam engines adapted from railway locomotives powered screw propellers, and internal heating systems were installed. The vessels were stocked with provisions designed to last 3 years, along with libraries, recreational equipment, and supplies intended to maintain morale during long Arctic winters. HMS Erebus carried Sir John Franklin as commander, while HMS Terror was led by Captain Francis Crozier, an experienced polar officer. In May 1845, they departed England, bound for the unknown reaches of the Canadian Arctic. Their last confirmed European sighting was in Baffin Bay, after which they sailed into the ice-choked archipelago. By September 1846, both ships were trapped in Victoria Strait, near King William Island. Despite the crew's skill and the ship's design, they remained immobilized through 2 harsh winters. Archaeological evidence and Inuit testimony later confirmed that the vessels never escaped the ice and eventually sank. The wrecks of Erebus and Terror would remain hidden for more than 150 years. HMS Erebus was discovered in 2014, and HMS Terror followed in 2016, revealing remarkably preserved remains of the vessels. Their discovery confirmed historical accounts and offered new insight into the challenges and ambitions of 19th-century Arctic exploration. These ships, symbols of British technological ambition, highlight both the ingenuity and the limits of human planning in the face of the Arctic's relentless power. The Franklin expedition set sail with 129 men aboard HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. They were drawn from the Royal Navy, including experienced sailors, marines, engineers, and petty officers. Many had served on long-distance voyages or prior polar expeditions, bringing skill and resilience to the mission. At the helm was Sir John Franklin, with Captain Francis Crozier as his second-in-command. The crew's expectations were shaped by British naval confidence and careful planning. The expedition was intended to last 3 years, with provisions stocked to match. Preserved foods, shipboard heating, and even libraries and games were included to support morale during long winters. The Admiralty believed that discipline, technology, and planning could overcome the Arctic's harsh conditions. Letters sent home before departure reflect a sense of routine and optimism. Crew members prepared for 1 or 2 winters trapped in ice, confident that the ship's design and supplies would see them through. However, the expedition largely ignored indigenous knowledge. Inuit populations in the region had lived in harmony with the Arctic for generations, but official planning emphasized European methods over local expertise. This reliance on European techniques would later prove fatal. As the expedition pressed deeper into the Arctic, these assumptions were tested. Prolonged ice entrapment, harsh weather, and dwindling supplies challenged even the most experienced officers and men. The contrast between expectation and reality would ultimately reveal the limits of 19th-century naval planning and British confidence in the polar world. The Franklin expedition began smoothly. In May 1845, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror set sail from England, crossing the Atlantic without incident. Their journey included a planned stop at Disko Bay in Greenland, where final supplies were taken on board, and 5 men returned to Britain. Letters from this stop describe the ships, provisions, and crew in good condition, reflecting optimism and routine. In July, the expedition was sighted by whaling ships in Baffin Bay, marking the last confirmed European contact. Franklin made a critical decision to follow Lancaster Sound, the most promising known entrance to the Northwest Passage. His navigation at this stage was both cautious and strategic, reflecting his experience in polar exploration. The expedition successfully completed its first winter at Beechey Island in 1845 to 1846. Camps were established ashore, shipboard routines continued, and scientific observations were recorded. Archaeological evidence shows that the crew maintained standard Royal Navy procedures, and while 3 sailors died and were buried on the island, such losses were considered typical for Arctic expeditions of the time. Despite these early successes, vulnerabilities were already present. The Arctic's unpredictable ice and harsh winters posed challenges beyond the crew's control. Yet, during this first winter, hope remained, and the men were confident that they could continue their mission. Their early competence masked the isolation and dangers that lay ahead, setting the stage for the crisis that would follow. After leaving Beechey Island in the summer of 1846, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror sailed south through Peel Sound, entering Victoria Strait, west of King William Island. There, the expedition encountered unusually heavy pack ice. By September, both ships were trapped, unable to break free. The ships remained immobilized through the winters of 1846 to 1847 and 1847 to 1848. Isolation set in. With no European vessels in the area and no immediate prospect of rescue, the crew faced extreme conditions. Provisions dwindled, morale declined, and the Arctic's relentless cold made survival a daily challenge. In a cairn on King William Island, a record later known as the Victory Point Note was left. It confirms that Sir John Franklin died in June 1847, more than a year after the ships became trapped. By April 1848, the remaining 105 men made the fateful decision to abandon their vessels and march south, seeking safety along the Back River. The prolonged entrapment in ice turned a well-equipped and confident expedition into a desperate struggle. The isolation exposed the limits of even the most advanced 19th-century planning, showing how unpredictable the Arctic could be. What had begun as a journey of exploration and ambition became a fight for survival against an indifferent, frozen landscape. Leadership on the Franklin expedition was tested under extreme conditions. Sir John Franklin commanded the voyage until his death in June 1847. His early decisions, choosing Lancaster Sound, wintering at Beechey Island, and navigating through Peel Sound, followed Admiralty guidance and the best knowledge of Arctic navigation at the time. After Franklin's death, command passed to Captain Francis Crozier, a seasoned polar officer. Faced with 2 winters trapped in Victoria Strait, dwindling supplies, and a crew weakened by cold and illness, Crozier made a series of difficult decisions. Chief among them was the choice to abandon the ships in April 1848 and attempt an overland march south toward the Back River, a route that might lead to Hudson's Bay Company outposts and potential rescue. This decision has been widely debated. Some questioned leaving the ships, which were still largely intact, but evidence suggests the choice reflected desperation rather than poor judgment. With men incapacitated, ice unyielding, and no hope of release, staying aboard offered little chance of survival. Leadership during the expedition was also shaped by prevailing British naval assumptions. Officers relied on European survival methods and limited indigenous knowledge, maintained strict hierarchy, and adhered to standard Royal Navy practices. These constraints left few alternatives when faced with prolonged isolation. Ultimately, leadership decisions on the Franklin expedition were rational within the framework of mid-19th century naval experience. Yet, even careful planning and experience could not overcome the overwhelming power of the Arctic, illustrating the fragile line between command and catastrophe in extreme environments. Illness and malnutrition played a decisive role in the Franklin expedition's collapse. Scurvy, caused by a deficiency of vitamin C, likely affected many of the crew during their prolonged isolation. Though the ships carried lime juice and tinned foods, vitamin C degraded over time, and consumption was often inconsistent. Skeletal remains recovered from Beechey Island and King William Island show evidence of long-term nutritional deficiency. After the ships became trapped in ice, starvation became an increasing threat. Initial provisions were abundant, but extended entrapment exhausted supplies. When the crew abandoned the ships in April 1848 and attempted to march south, they faced extreme cold, minimal food, and harsh terrain. Archaeological findings and Inuit testimony indicate that men weakened progressively, succumbing to exhaustion, exposure, and hunger. Other illnesses compounded these struggles. Autopsies of sailors who died at Beechey Island revealed pneumonia and tuberculosis, common in the confined and frigid shipboard environment. Crowded living conditions and reduced immunity made the men vulnerable to infection, accelerating their decline. Recent analysis also shows elevated lead levels in crew remains, likely from tinned food or the ship's water systems. While lead may have contributed to cognitive and physical impairment, modern scholarship views it as a contributing factor rather than a primary cause of death. Together, scurvy, starvation, and disease gradually incapacitated the crew. Each challenge alone was dangerous, but in combination over months of isolation, they became lethal. The expedition's suffering reminds us of the harsh realities faced by 19th-century explorers and how even meticulous planning could not overcome the Arctic's unyielding conditions. By April 1848, the Franklin expedition faced a dire reality. The ships had been trapped in ice near King William Island for nearly 2 years. Sir John Franklin had died the previous year, leaving Captain Francis Crozier in command. Supplies were dwindling, and the crew's health was deteriorating. The Victory Point note, left in a cairn, records the critical decision to abandon the vessels. At that time, 105 men remained alive. The plan was to march south toward the Back River, following a known route to Hudson's Bay Company outposts, in hopes of rescue. This decision reflected standard Royal Navy survival doctrine, prioritizing reaching established supply networks over remaining with the ships. Archaeological evidence and Inuit testimony suggest the abandonment was methodical. The crew hauled boats, provisions, and equipment across ice and tundra, demonstrating organization under extreme conditions. Yet the terrain was harsh, the climate unrelenting, and food scarce. The march stretched hundreds of kilometers over barren land, leaving the men vulnerable to exhaustion, disease, and exposure. This phase of the expedition illustrates both human determination and the limits of survival under Arctic conditions. Abandoning the ships was a rational choice, made with the knowledge and resources available at the time. But it marked the final stage of the Franklin expedition, as the men faced their most desperate challenge. After leaving HMS Erebus and HMS Terror in April 1848, the remaining crew began their last desperate journey. Under Captain Francis Crozier, 105 men set out across the frozen landscape, aiming for the Back River and the safety of Hudson's Bay Company outposts. The route was theoretically familiar, but the Arctic was unforgiving. The men carried heavy boats, sledges, and provisions, slowly making their way along the western and southern coasts of King William Island. Progress was painfully slow. Archaeological evidence and Inuit testimony show that individuals gradually succumbed to hunger, exhaustion, and illness, leaving behind campsites, abandoned equipment, and human remains along the route. Small groups or individuals may have pushed further south, but there is no confirmed evidence that anyone reached a trading post or permanent settlement. Inuit accounts describe encounters with dying men and abandoned camps, reinforcing the grim reality of the expedition's final days. The final march south was a relentless test of endurance. Starvation, extreme cold, and disease reduced a well-prepared naval crew to a shadow of its former strength. Every step of the journey reflected the limits of human resilience in one of the harshest environments on Earth. In the end, none survived. The march stands as a haunting testament to the Arctic's power and the fragility of life in isolation. Inuit knowledge provides crucial insight into the fate of the Franklin expedition. From the 1850s onward, Inuit living near King William Island shared accounts with British and American search teams. They described sightings of white men traveling south, dragging boats and sledges, and the discovery of abandoned camps and scattered belongings. Some accounts reported bodies along the coast, while others noted interactions with weakened survivors seeking food. Inuit testimony also suggested that one of the ships was seen trapped or crushed by ice after the crew had abandoned it, details later confirmed by archaeological discoveries. These oral histories even included evidence of extreme starvation, including cases of cannibalism. Initially dismissed by Victorian authorities, later forensic analysis confirmed marks on human remains consistent with post-mortem dismemberment. Inuit communities also recovered and traded artifacts from the expedition: metal tools, personal items, and pieces of the ships, providing crucial clues for later searchers. Modern scholarship recognizes Inuit testimony as vital for reconstructing the expedition's final stages. Their observations, passed down orally, often align with archaeological evidence, offering a perspective that European records alone could not provide. These encounters reveal both the isolation of the Franklin expedition and the enduring value of indigenous knowledge. Without Inuit testimony, much of the story of survival, desperation, and the journey's tragic end would remain unknown. The disappearance of the Franklin expedition triggered one of the largest search efforts in Arctic exploration history. Formal searches began in 1848, 3 years after Franklin's departure, following standard Admiralty expectations for long polar voyages. Over the next decade, more than 30 British and American expeditions set out by sea and overland, hoping to find survivors or determine the fate of the missing crews. Early search teams focused on known routes, including Lancaster Sound and Beechey Island. In 1850, they discovered 3 graves and a winter camp at Beechey Island, confirming that Franklin's men had wintered there in 1845 to 1846. But beyond these initial clues, evidence was scarce. In 1854, explorer John Rae obtained critical Inuit testimony describing starving Europeans near King William Island and reporting instances of cannibalism. His findings were controversial at the time, but later forensic evidence confirmed the truth of these accounts. In 1859, Francis McClintock's expedition recovered the Victory Point Note, the only official record left by the crew, detailing the abandonment of the ships. Though the search expeditions did not rescue any survivors, they produced lasting contributions. Large portions of the Canadian Arctic coastline were mapped, and geographic knowledge expanded significantly. In the 21st century, renewed interest in the Franklin expedition led to the discovery of HMS Erebus in 2014 and HMS Terror in 2016, confirming historical records and Inuit accounts. Together, these searches transformed a tragic loss into a source of exploration and understanding, revealing the resilience of those who ventured into the Arctic and the enduring legacy of Franklin's expedition. In recent decades, modern forensic research has shed remarkable light on the Franklin expedition. Excavations at Beechey Island in the 1980s revealed the preserved remains of 3 sailors who died during the first winter, 1845 to 1846. Autopsies showed pneumonia and tuberculosis as primary causes of death, along with clear signs of malnutrition. Tissue and bone analysis also revealed elevated lead levels, initially suggesting lead poisoning as a major factor. Later studies refined this understanding. Elevated lead was common in 19th century Britain, and while it may have affected cognition and physical health, it was not the primary cause of death. Skeletal remains from King William Island also showed bone damage consistent with scurvy, and cut marks confirmed extreme starvation and post-mortem dismemberment, providing physical evidence of accounts described by Inuit witnesses. Stable isotope analysis revealed a heavy reliance on preserved foods, reflecting the expedition's provisioning methods. Archaeological evidence tracked the overland retreat and movement of equipment, aligning with Inuit testimony about the final stages of the journey. The discovery of HMS Erebus in 2014 and HMS Terror in 2016 further confirmed historical reconstructions. The ship's locations, conditions, and abandonment timelines matched both written records and indigenous accounts. Taken together, modern forensic research has transformed our understanding of the Franklin expedition. It provides a detailed, evidence-based account of how illness, malnutrition, and extreme conditions combined to end one of history's most ambitious Arctic voyages. The Franklin expedition remains one of the most compelling stories of exploration, ambition, and human endurance. Though it ended in tragedy, the journey shaped our understanding of the Arctic and revealed the limits of even the most carefully planned expeditions. The loss of Sir John Franklin and his crew highlighted the dangers of isolation, extreme weather, and reliance on technology alone. It also revealed the consequences of dismissing indigenous knowledge, showing that survival in the Arctic depended as much on adaptation as on preparation. Yet the expedition's impact extends beyond its failure. The massive search efforts that followed expanded geographic knowledge, mapping much of the Canadian Arctic. Inuit testimony, preserved artifacts, and modern forensic research together offer a vivid reconstruction of the crew's final months. The eventual discovery of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror in the 21st century provided tangible evidence of the journey, confirming both historical records and oral histories. The Franklin expedition endures as a symbol of exploration, its ambition, courage, and human cost. It reminds us of the fragility of life in extreme environments and the resilience of those who dare to venture into the unknown. Even in loss, Franklin and his crew left a lasting legacy, shaping how we understand the Arctic, the history of exploration, and the enduring power of human curiosity.